Madison, after the Constitution was adopted, really was scared. And so were lots of others like him. Because there were rumblings going on, even though 9 states had signed onto the Constitution, and of course the very first state, right, it's in their license plate, was Delaware. And that's why you can see the first state. What makes Delaware the first state on their license plate is because they were the very first to sign the Constitution. Little tiny Delaware. But that's not what scared Madison. What scared Madison is there were rumblings going on from opponents of the Constitution that they hated it so much they were going to have a second constitutional convention and rewrite the thing. Do you know there are people talking about doing that today? Of scrapping this whole Constitution and writing an entirely different one. Taking no president of the United States, it would be an executive council, which they had in the Articles of Confederation. We know how well that worked, at least you do. It failed. Get rid of the Senate, because the Senate, after all, isn't democratic, because after all, it's equal. Every state has 2 senators. What's democratic about that? Let's get rid of the Senate, and let's get rid of a lot of the powers of the Supreme Court. And while we're at it, let's get rid of capitalism. They call themselves democratic socialists. After all, they looked at the Constitution and they saw nothing about freedom of speech. Where are the guarantees of freedom of speech? Where's the guarantees of freedom of religion? Where's the guarantees of freedom of the press? What about quartering soldiers in homes? All the things that we fought this revolution for. We're not signing this. No way. Next thing you know, Congress is going to be telling us how to run our lives. Now we have a president. How do we know that's going to not going to become all powerful? And so there were a lot of voices that wanted to amend this Constitution, and the ink was not even hardly dry on it. What happened? Well, June 21st, 1789, New Hampshire becomes the 9th state. In 2 months later, those who wrote the Constitution are saying, we gotta amend it. We gotta amend it right away, because if we don't amend it, there are people that are going to call for this new constitutional convention, and we're going to lose the whole thing, and that's not what we want. Plus, Washington and Madison supported it very, very early. Washington, even several times in his first inaugural address in 1790, said, we need a Bill of Rights. We need a Bill of Rights. And so Washington had this reputation where if Washington wants it, then we better think seriously about it. So they did. And here it is at a glance. And we're going to go over each of these one by one. The First Amendment, we got freedom of religion, assembly, press, petition, and speech. Second Amendment is the right to arm bears. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, sorry. The right to bear arms. Yes. The right not to quarter soldiers. See? Freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. Due process of law, rights of the accused. Look at that. Jury, all of these things over here. There's 3 of those amendments had to do with something that was very, very precious to our founding generation. That is the trial by jury. Why was that so precious? Well, I'll tell you in a little bit. Individual rights, and these catch-all amendments over here say almost nothing really important, but it was really important that they included it, and I'll explain why. We want specific guarantees that the Congress is not going to make any laws creating a national church. That Congress is not going to, or the president or anybody else is not going to restrict people's rights in these areas. But notice the restriction is on Congress. You see, this was a limitation on federal power. The federal government cannot infringe on these freedoms. And that means, of course, that the president can't do it either, implied in it. You see? So what did this mean? What did freedom of religion actually mean if we break this down? Well, there was not going to be a Church of the United States, just as there was an established church. Now, the Church of England, for example, is an established church, which means what? Those of you who know this.
No. The government owns it. Yeah.
The government, yeah. So basically the government pays the salaries of the folks there. The government, taxes that come from everybody go into the pot, and they support the Church of England. You see. It did not affect the churches in the States. Notice it says, Congress shall make no law. Madison could care less. Well, actually, that's not true. Madison actually wanted to slip in an amendment saying that no state shall do this either. But no, nobody wanted that. What about the rest of them? What about, of course, freedom of speech? Because in Britain, for example, British citizens weren't shielded from accusations of treason for speaking freely. And we have to make sure that in our country we don't get there either. I've heard some rumblings from the federal government that simply sharing your opinions about the policies of the executive branch is labeling those utterances treason. That is not why we have the First Amendment. That, you could get that in Britain, and if you spoke the truth until the 20th century as a private citizen, it didn't matter. You could still be charged with treason. You could still be charged with libel. Why? Because in Britain, where you had a class system that was very prominent until the 20th century, if you were speaking ill of your betters, doesn't make any difference if it was the truth, you were still in trouble because it wasn't your place to speak ill of your betters. The Second Amendment, that's another one that a lot of folks kind of like wonder about. Yeah, that's a biggie. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. Now, there are two sides to this one, right? You have the gun advocates and you have the gun opponents. I'll use that term loosely over here. And this still continues to go on. Now, everywhere in the Bill of Rights, it spells out individual liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion. How come you separate this and say, but you don't have the freedom to own your own guns? And where people will say, well, look, this amendment had to do with the militias. That's what it was for, not individual gun ownership. It had to do with the militia, right? The militia was the people's army. And the modern militia is the National Guard, right? Hunters and target shooters don't bear arms. The term bear arms was a military term. If you were bearing arms, you were about ready to go fight for your country. Now, the Third Amendment, that's pretty obvious over here. Remember, before the Revolution, you had the British that were being quartered in homes. Well, can't do that anymore without the consent of the owner. Pretty simple, right? Yeah. But they wanted to make sure that that was included. The Fourth Amendment has to do with unreasonable search and seizure. So that's why, for example, that is why when someone comes to search your house for something, whatever, drugs, what have you, it's right for you to ask them what question? Do you have a warrant? Do you have a warrant? And the warrants, of course, are issued by local, what's that?
Judge.
Yes, exactly, a judge, yeah, local court. So there is that, according to probable cause. You just can't go in and search. And the reason we have the Fourth Amendment is because before the Revolution, the British had a policy of just breaking into homes and businesses to search for and confiscate things that perhaps might be contraband. So if there was just a rumor that you were smuggling, all they had to do was hear the rumor, and then they were in your home or they were in your business. And there it is, you see, right? And look at over here. No person shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. And of course, the reason for some of this is because in Europe, you could be questioned and possibly even tortured until you gave it up. And this happened in a lot of places, still does, until you gave up whatever information that they said that you had. Basically, that was what made the famous show trials of Stalin in the 1930s and the late 1940s. These show trials where people basically signed anything, confessed anything to stop the pain. The Sixth Amendment. Now, it's interesting that in several of these, the idea of juries are very, very important, like this one. In all criminal prosecutions, all, and all means all, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy, I don't know what happened to that, and public trial by an impartial jury, notice, of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. And it tells you about all of this stuff over here, right? Isn't it? And nowadays, when a person is arrested, what do the policemen have to read him or her? The Miranda rights, exactly. The Miranda rights comes out really of the essence of the Sixth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed for you. That's from the Sixth Amendment. To have the assistance of counsel for his defense. The seventh, again, look at this over here. Trial by jury. Look at that. In cases, and of course, it's interesting, in suits of common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20. Well, $20 was not a whole lot back then. No one really pays attention to the amount nowadays. But the idea that the right of jury, trial by jury, shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court, according to the rules of common law. The 1760s and 1770s, when Britain really began to clamp down on trade, they had not, that's one of the causes of the revolution. They had more or less let things go since the 1600s. Now all of a sudden, they need money, and they need it badly because they fought the French and Indian War. That was the war that Washington was involved in, his very first war. And the British had so much debt in winning this war, they had to get money. So they're figuring out ways of clamping down on smuggling, on manufacturing in the economy. And all of a sudden, people in the Americas were saying, whoa, what is going on here? Why are all these rules all of a sudden? Excessive bail, that's another one. You can't, nor cruel and unusual punishment. Well, that's one. Right, back then, cruel and unusual punishment, boy, you could be drawn and quartered, for example. Now the 9th and 10th Amendments, the very last ones over here. These two kind of go together. So I'm gonna look at one, then I'm gonna look at the other. It says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. What's that mean? Simply this. That's yours. Thank you. You're welcome, Robbie. Just because we've listed a whole bunch of specific rights does not mean you don't have others too. Well, this doesn't say that I have the right to buy a car. This doesn't say that I have the right to choose whoever I want to marry. This doesn't say that I have the right to actually move from one city to another. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. And when they say the United States, which government do they mean? Whenever the Constitution says the United States, the federal government, that's right. So the power is not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution. What's that? Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and some of the other articles. Not the first 10 amendments. Don't concern the federal government at all. Nor prohibited by it, the Constitution, to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. So these two kind of go together. Basically, why were these two even included in here? Obviously, the drafters were very much afraid of misinterpretation. And like I said, one of the misinterpretations was, hey, you left out these other important rights. What about the rights of farmers to farm whatever they want to and not be dictated to by the federal government? You didn't put that in here. What a mess that would be. That's why we have a Constitution, folks, that fits in your pocket. The Bill of Rights didn't give any powers to the federal government. And just because we have a Bill of Rights with specific rights doesn't mean those are all the rights we have. So that is the important thing about the 9th and the 10th Amendment, is that states have rights.